Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Henry, and I am the Secretary General at the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims, based here in Copenhagen. And by the way, happy World Pride 2021, located here in Denmark. It's a real pleasure to be with you on this breakout group today. We'll be talking about promoting a global ban on so-called conversion therapy. The need for a global ban is there because this torturous practice is actually defined as torture through the Global Coalition Against Torture and Ill Treatment. So the session that we have today, in which you're all invited, brings together key actors working across the world on so-called conversion therapy. We're bringing together key actors to discuss how health expertise can be used in documenting torture, and that can help us to implement a global ban. This is intended, this space, to be open and safe for you to discuss the critical issues around conversion therapy, to reflect on how it's being used around the world, and to create new connections between people and organizations with different mandates, different experiences, so we can stop this torturous practice. So how did this all start for us at IRCT, an organization working with the prevention of torture? A health-based organization looking at actually the consequences of torture on human beings. Well, back in April 2020, the IRCT and the International Forensics Experts Group issued an expert statement. And this expert statement detailed how so-called conversion therapy in all circumstances qualifies as torture and ill treatment. What we did was we used our health-based expertise to document the severe physical and psychological pain and suffering caused by these practices. And we documented how these practices don't comply with medical ethics and professional evidence-based medical practice. The forensic credibility of these assessments really strengthened the documentation and gave a lot of the actors in the field the position and the ability to say this evidence shows without a doubt that this practice of conversion therapy actually qualifies as torture. We were able to show through the assessment a decrease in self-esteem of people who had experienced this, episodes of significant anxiety, depressive tendencies, depressive syndrome, social isolation, intimacy difficulties, self-hatred, sexual dysfunction, and suicidal thoughts. Since its release, the IFEC statement and the IRCT report, together with a couple other very good reports on the topic, have been used, and they've been referred to in the report by the UN independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity, who will be joining us later on the panel, in the European Union, and in a number of national jurisdictions. So they've been referencing these reports to promote an absolute ban on conversion therapy by arguing that it constitutes torture, plain and simple. So during this session today, I'm excited to say that we'll be hearing very different perspectives from some of the central actors in this field. First, we'll get a global perspective from Outright Action International, followed by national examples from Ecuador and from China and from the UK. Then we will hear a global perspective from the World Medical Association, and finally we'll be concluding with Victor Madrigal-Borloz, the UN independent expert, who will draw conclusions and connections and lessons learned from the statements of the previous speakers, so that we can then go into a final session, an open session of 30 minutes on the floor, where we'll hear from your experiences, we'll entertain your questions, we'll be able to debate and find out what is the way for us to move forward on this topic, and how can we be better able to work together. So we look forward very much to this session with you, and are very pleased to have you all here. And we're also very pleased to be an executive partner with World Pride, and hope that we can contribute in our small way from our health-based expertise and forensics evidence, some of the support that's needed and the documentation, the credibility behind our call for a global ban on torture, on conversion therapy. Thank you. I'm pleased now to introduce you to the first panel speaker we have, and this is Yvonne Owino-Wamari. She is the Africa Program Officer from the Conversion Therapy Project at Outright Action International, and she'll be giving us an overview of the global work against so-called conversion therapy, and we're really pleased to have you with us today. So take it away. Thank you.
Greetings to everyone. My name is Yvonne Wamari and I am the Africa Program Officer at Outright Action International, one of the oldest global organizations fighting for the human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer people around the world. I'm joining you from Nairobi, Kenya. Outright has been carrying out a number of initiatives to condemn and challenge so-called conversion therapy globally. Notably, in 2019, Outright released the first ever global report on the prevalence of these harmful practices. In the same year, Outright, working with local partners in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, embarked on a project to build a body of knowledge on so-called conversion therapy in these three countries to inform advocacy at national, regional, and international level towards a complete ban of these harmful practices in Africa. And in March 2021, we convened two experts meetings, an Asia regional meeting and a global experts meeting on pathways to eradicate SOGI change efforts. Through these initiatives, we have found that there are a number of factors that hinder a ban on so-called conversion therapy globally. I will highlight a few. The first is societal stigma and discrimination. Despite homosexuality having been removed from the International Classification of Diseases in 1990 and transgender identities being removed in 2019, perceptions of LGBTIQ identities as disorders persist, and efforts to change, to convert, to suppress, or divert them continue. This ultimately convinces the person that there is something wrong with them and breeds internalized homophobia that makes them seek out these harmful practices so as to conform and retain their acceptance. For instance, within the family structure, we are raised with certain values, and going against those values is deemed disrespectful to your parents and in some cases, even your ancestors. In addition, religious and cultural ideologies promote the need for LGBTIQ people to change or suppress their true selves, and this also leads to a demand for so-called conversion therapy. Like everyone else, LGBTIQ people long for acceptance by family and faith, and giving in to the reality of who they are would mean going against family and religious values. Secondly, restrictive legislative environments that criminalize same-sex relations and legitimize the violations against LGBTIQ individuals. And in some cases, these violations include so-called conversion therapy. The focus in such countries will therefore be on decriminalizing same-sex relations and creating a legal environment that protects LGBTIQ people before addressing so-called conversion therapy specifically. And lastly, terminology. The terminology used in most global North countries, such as conversion therapy, reparative therapy, or social change efforts, are not widely understood in other contexts. And similarly, the prevalence and manifestation of these practices are not well understood. Therefore, curbing these practices relies on a general awareness and understanding of what these practices actually constitute, as well as how they cause profound harm. The statement by IRCT reiterates the position held by the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity, as well as the special rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment, who all recognize that some acts of so-called conversion therapy do amount to torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. The more people we have condemning these practices, the louder our voices can be in eradicating so-called conversion therapy globally. The IRCT can join in the advocacy work that Outright and its partners are involved in by sensitizing actors within its network on the nature and extent of so-called conversion therapy and the impact it has on LGBTIQ lives, as well as continue to condemn these practices. With this, we will build a critical mass around the recognition of the harm so-called conversion therapy has on LGBTIQ lives. We hope that IRCT will accelerate its efforts to provide expert testimony on well-documented health and mental health harms that so-called conversion therapies cause. We know that these practices are occurring everywhere in the world, but often remain hidden in the shadows. As more survivors come forward and as more activists around the world seek to end these practices, the expertise of IRCT will be increasingly needed in underscoring how efforts to change or suppress one's sexual orientation or gender identity are, in fact, cruel and degrading and lead to medical and mental health harm and must be stopped. Thank you.
It's now my great pleasure to introduce Cayetana Salao from Ecuador, from the organization Taller Comunicación Mujer. And she will be speaking about their experience in Ecuador as they have tried to denounce serious human rights violations against LGBTQ individuals. So with these words of introduction, I will hand the floor over to Cayetana and wish you a successful intervention. Thank you very much.
En el centro comienzo a gritar que soy lesbiana, que no tengo nada que hacer ahí, que esta es una vulneración a mis derechos humanos. Pero lo que conseguí fue que me encierren. Ahí me dejaron. Me cogían con los brazos hacia atrás en una especie de trípode mientras me golpeaban y me decían que aguante como macho. Luego me vestían con ropa femenina y obligaban a los hombres del centro a que me acosen. Este es el relato de una mujer lesbiana encerrada con la complicidad de su familia en un centro de rehabilitación de adicciones en la ciudad de Cuenca, Ecuador, y esta es una realidad que viene sucediendo hace más de 20 años en el país. Yo soy Cayetana Salao, parte del taller de comunicación mujer, que junto con otras organizaciones de la sociedad civil, familiares y víctimas, hemos venido denunciando la existencia de graves vulneraciones a los derechos de las personas LGBTI. Hemos realizado una serie de acciones a lo largo de estos años, juicios populares, acciones con medios de comunicación, peticiones de información, y hemos reportado estos casos ante comités y organismos de derechos humanos, tanto nacionales como internacionales. Todo para visibilizar y denunciar la existencia de prácticas concretas que en el país se ejercen para modificar la orientación sexual y la identidad de género de las personas. Esto sucede con la complicidad de la familia influenciada por discursos de carácter religioso y un entorno sociocultural que discrimina e impide el desarrollo de nuestras existencias. Pero además sucede con la ejecución de entidades concretas, entidades de carácter privado, centros de rehabilitación de adicciones que de manera clandestina ofertan terapias de deshomosexualización y cobran por ello. En estos centros se han registrado encierros que suceden bajo la lógica de secuestros, algunas veces con la administración de fármacos, y hemos detectado algunos casos con la actuación de la policía. Esta forma de internamiento involuntario implica la interdicción forzada, y de los casos que hemos llegado a conocer, en estos espacios se pueden llegar a dar prácticas de diferentes formas de acoso, diferentes formas de violencia psicológica, privación de alimentos, suministro de alimentos en mal estado, dopaje, administración arbitraria de fármacos, encierro en calabozos, encadenamientos, colgamientos, ahorcamientos, baños en agua fría, maltrato físico y ejercicios forzados. Pero lo más fuerte es que se han detectado casos en donde se han dado electroshocks y también se han dado violaciones sexuales correctivas. Como las denominadas clínicas de rehabilitación o centros de rehabilitación de adicciones están bajo la regulación del Sistema de Salud Nacional, las organizaciones hemos invertido mucho tiempo durante muchos años para eliminar los vacíos que impiden que se clausuren estos centros cuando se dan vulneraciones a los derechos humanos y que permitan que se denuncien de manera correcta ante las autoridades competentes. Durante muchos años se peleó para que en el Código Orgánico de Salud se incorpore la prohibición de prácticas que pretenden modificar la orientación sexual e identidad de género en establecimientos de salud. Y si bien esto fue incorporado en el texto, el año pasado el veto presidencial impidió que esto pueda ser una realidad en las normativas nacionales de salud. Por otro lado, lo que sí se ha conseguido en cuanto a las normas ha sido una reforma al Código Penal en el 2014, de tal manera que en este momento ya se consideran como delitos los actos de odio y también como tortura las intenciones de modificar la orientación sexual e identidad de género en el nuevo Código Orgánico Integral Penal. Pese a todo eso, hasta el momento no se ha logrado contar con ninguna sentencia de ningún responsable sobre este tipo de prácticas, pese a que muchos años el Estado dijo haber intervenido y rescatado personas. Hasta el momento las organizaciones de la sociedad civil no sabemos qué ha pasado con las víctimas, ni cuáles son los procesos, ni cuáles son los responsables. Muchas veces cuando se trata de denunciar estos casos, ni la policía, ni los jueces, ni operadores de justicia logran recibir estas denuncias como verdaderos delitos, por lo tanto no los procesan y en el procedimiento no se ha logrado ninguna sentencia. Por otro lado, tampoco se ha hecho nada para eliminar los prejuicios en el entorno familiar y en el entorno educativo, en donde se cultiva esta cultura del odio y de la discriminación por orientación sexual e identidad de género. Tampoco se hace nada en el país por regular o desalentar la emisión de discursos de odio que se emanan en los espacios religiosos, católicos y evangélicos principalmente, pero digamos aquellos de carácter fundamentalista que rechazan a las personas LGBTI. Esta es la realidad del Ecuador, que aún siguen sucediendo en espacios privados de salud, en espacios de consejería religiosa y también en un entorno sociocultural que constantemente impide el desarrollo de nuestras existencias. Hacemos un llamado a toda la gente para que estas prácticas cesen en todo el mundo.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Yan-Hu Peng. He is the Director of LGBT Rights Advocacy in China. And Yan-Hu is working in an incredibly challenging environment, and therefore it's a real pleasure and an opportunity for us to have him with us today. The questions that he will be addressing are what kind of conversion therapy is happening in China today, and the initiative by the LGBT Rights Advocacy Group in China to go to the UN Committee Against Torture with evidence that this conversion therapy was going on. And then we've also asked Yan-Hu to talk about what is it like to use the argument that conversion therapy is torture? Is it useful to use this argumentation, this rationale? And if so, how? And how can we others in the movement learn about this? So with those words of introduction, I will invite Yan-Hu Peng, and I hope very much that you have a successful intervention. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Yan from China. I work in a LGBT group set up in 2013 called LGBT Rights Advocacy China. We focus on providing legal aid to the community and advocate for the policy change to LGBT equal protection legally. Personally, I experienced gay conversion therapy in 2014. It was an electric shock gay cure. And then I took the legal case to the court in Beijing, and we won the case. It was the first legal one winning in China on the LGBT equality. Let me start with a gay cure story in China. It was a very crucial one. In October 2016, a young man who was 37 years old, he lived in a village from central China. He was sent by his family member to the local mental health hospital. He enforced to accept 19 days treatment in that hospital. He cannot leave that hospital, and he was enforced to take pills, shaming, threaten, cut connection with others, and after 19 days, his boyfriend asked help from our community organization, and we called the police to rescue him from the hospital. He kept nightmare every day since he left that hospital in the past few months, and he can't tell anything what happened in that hospital. That treatment brought him a lot of pain, and our law cannot protect people getting hurt from that kind of torture. It works institutionally in China. Firstly, our laws and regulation lack of protection. The Chinese classification on mental disease have removed homosexuality and bisexuality from mental disease in 2001 already, but we still have no any policy or banning to stop conversion therapy. Until the end of 2020, there are still 116 hospitals and clinics providing gay conversion therapy all over China. This is not a universal survey. We just call one by one and record this number. And more transgender young people accept conversion therapy. They were sent by their family to the net addicted school and also to the mental health hospital. They experience this kind of torture without any protection. So during the past few years, we have already bring several cases to the court, and we use the legal campaign to raise the issue to the public and also to the policymaker. And we work with the lawyers, journalists, and our community member together to bring the change. But until now, our textbook still have stigma and the long education to all of our students. I just accept one electric shock conversion therapy treatment 6 years ago, but I still remember the shock and the psychological harm that bring to me. I think for many people, they experience many days, many time of treatment in China because of their sexuality or gender identity. This kind of torture should stop institutionally. We hope that legally we have the policy ban to stop conversion therapy. Secondly, we hope that the psychiatry association and psychology association can speak out to make statement stop conversion therapy. And also, we hope we can have more freedom of knowledge and information to approach to everyone in China, because they have rights and they need to know more about the knowledge.
It's my pleasure now to introduce our next speaker. Jane Ozan is the director of the Ozan Foundation in the UK. Jane will be speaking about the role of religious institutions as they implement conversion therapy and the consequences and the harm that's imposed on people as they implement this torturous practice. She'll also talk about the role of states with respect to these religious institutions, and I really look forward to hearing her 3 major points. So with this, I turn it over to you, Jane, and thank you very much for participating.
Conversion therapy is a direct assault on the fundamental rights and freedoms of LGBT people, as it seeks to eradicate, suppress, or change our innate identity, and so stop us being who we intrinsically are. It is based on the premise that certain sexual orientations and gender identities are unacceptable and must therefore be altered or suppressed to conform to an acceptable norm. The harm inflicted on innocent individuals is profound, and yet has gone unrecognised and unaddressed by many governments for far too long. That is why it's so important that the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Juan Mendez, described these practices as torture in his report to the Human Rights Council in 2016. I would suggest that this ruling has had 3 specific impacts which have helped us secure a commitment to ban conversion therapy in the UK. Firstly, it formally recognises the significant impact that so-called conversion therapy has on an individual's health, thus validating what victims have been bravely stating for years, but with sadly little impact or traction. Indeed, I believe it's important that we understand why this issue has remained hidden for so long, and that's because of the difficulty many victims have in speaking out against their friends, their family, and their communities. Tragically, few have been taken seriously when they've courageously done so. However, now, no government can deny the reality that conversion therapy is torture, both physically and also, importantly, psychologically. Corrective rape, physical violence and starvation, all forms of conversion therapy, are clearly physical acts of torture that cause severe pain or suffering. However, psychological pain and suffering can be just as deadly, given the significant levels of self-hatred and shame which lead so many to believe their only option is to take their very lives. This is particularly true, as I myself can testify, when undergoing practices conducted in a religious setting. For when the desired outcome is not achieved, the blame is frequently levelled on the victim, who is often told that it is their fault that their exorcism or healing prayers haven't worked. This creates a toxic, vicious cycle whereby the victim yearns to change, yet is left carrying the blame when it doesn't happen. The fact this is normally conducted by close friends and family known and trusted by the victim adds further to their trauma. They are left isolated, carrying unbearable feelings of failure and guilt. It is quite literally a living hell. And that leads me to my second reason why this ruling is so important, and that is that it is now impossible for religious organisations to deny the harm that they are knowingly inflicting. It is important for us to remember that Article 1 of the UN Convention on Torture expressly states that the purposes behind any act of torture includes any reason based on discrimination of any kind, which clearly therefore covers religious-based discrimination against LGBT people. It is worth noting here that the UK government's research has shown that victims have been subjected to conversion therapy in a range of settings, although by far the most common is that conducted in religious settings. My own foundation's 2018 Faith and Sexuality research confirmed this finding and highlighted the significant role that both religious leaders and religious teaching play in influencing an individual's motivation to seek out and undergo conversion therapy. It also showed that religious leaders were often the ones who conducted it. Despite this evidence, religious organisations have been shown to recognise the harm that they have and still are causing. Indeed, those who are set on continuing these degrading practices do not, sadly, often accept that they are in fact inflicting any harm at all, a trait common in various other areas where the government has had to intervene, such as smacking children or female genital mutilation. Sadly, many have seen religious practices such as prayer as benign forms of conversion therapy, which they believe is quite harmless and should therefore be allowed to continue. However, as Jonathan Cooper, a leading human rights lawyer in the UK, has recently said, coercive treatments, however they are labelled, are no less extreme or harmful. The damage they cause is equally long-lasting. Some may leave physical consequences, but they all leave mental scars. Recategorizing conversion therapy as spiritual counseling does not mitigate against the harm caused. Which leads me to my third point. This ruling is critically important in that international law is clear that governments have an obligation to protect their citizens from all forms of torture, even if it is couched as a religious practice to which individuals have purportedly consented. Human rights law does not permit consent to prohibited ill treatment. Indeed, the concept of consent is in fact irrelevant, as governments are duty-bound to protect their citizens from degrading practices. So, in summing up, all governments must take steps to proactively protect their citizens from the torture of conversion therapy, whether that be in physical or mental form, especially when it's inflicted as a form of discrimination, as is so often the case by religious groups. Thank you.
It is now my great pleasure to introduce Clarissa Delorme. She is the Senior Policy Advisor from the World Medical Association. So we're going global here now. Clarissa is coming to us to talk about the perspective of Global Medical Association, the 115 national associations around the world. So with these words, I'll hand it over to you, Clarissa, and welcome. And it's really nice to have you with us from the World Medical Association.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Clarisse Delorme. I am Senior Policy Advisor of the World Medical Association. The World Medical Association, also called the WMA, is an international organization representing physicians. The WMA provides ethical guidance to physicians through its policies covering a wide range of subjects on medical ethics and related human rights issues. The WMA is an umbrella organization with 115 national associations of physicians from different countries in the world. I've been asked to explore ways for the WMA and its members to help preventing and stopping health professionals to practice so-called conversion therapies. First of all, it is important to know that the WMA intervenes on cases of human rights and medical ethics violation on the basis only of a clear policy on the issue. WMA policies adopted by the General Assembly provide to the organization the mandate to take actions. In 2013, the WMA adopted a statement on natural violation of human sexuality. The statement condemns so-called conversion therapies as violation of human rights and stipulates that it is unethical for physicians to participate during any step of such procedures. Based on its policy, how can WMA intervene to put an end to those practices? At the international level, the WMA will promote the policy and collaborate with relevant actors in this area. Although international advocacy is necessary, it remains general and limited to the global sphere. It does not address the realities on the ground. However, through its members, the WMA can take action in countries on the basis of accurate information documenting human rights and medical ethics violation. Our member associations constitute often a consistent source of information. We also collaborate successfully with several global human rights organizations. The most common practice is that our member associations ask for WMA support to denounce a detrimental situation. Depending on the context, WMA will write a letter to the authorities or issue a press release in collaboration with its member. In some cases as well, an elected member might travel to the country to participate to a meeting and express official WMA support. There are also situations where the WMA is alerted by one of its human rights partners or by individuals about bad practices taking place in a country. Once the accuracy of the facts is verified, we will write to our member association in the country, asking that the case is investigated and, if confirmed, to take appropriate actions to put an end to it. The letter includes the relevant WMA policies and the supportive arguments. We offer our support and ask to be informed of the follow-up. For example, last November, we've been informed of cases of forced anal examination by health professionals in the context of prosecution of consensual same-sex relations in one country from the Asian region. Based on its resolution on prohibition of forced anal examination, the WMA wrote to its member association from the country recommending immediate measures to stop such practices. Despite several reminders, we received no response. This case illustrates the limit to WMA's action, as WMA cannot intervene if its member does not clearly express its consent to it. In many situations, the member association either doesn't react or refutes the allegation. The member might also reply that the case will be investigated without further notice. The reason for members' association for not taking actions are various. Fear of reprisal in authoritarian states, lack of resources or capacity in the association to take on the case, the fact that this is not a priority for the association, or the fact that WMA's position is not supported by the member concerned. Even if a member does not react, we still have a particular leverage that we can exercise. All WMA interventions are documented in its report of activities issued twice a year. These reports, approved by the Council and General Assembly, are available on our website and accessible to all. We therefore keep track of this advocacy work and of its follow-up or inaction by members. This can be a useful pressure tactic, as our members do not like to be blamed. We had the case in the past where one member association asked to remove a section of the report of activities documenting violence against health professionals in the country. This was refused by the General Assembly, but an annex was included expressing the reservation of the member. The fact that many associations by the WMA in countries remain unheeded should not stop the association to continue denouncing bad practices and asking its members to take action. It is necessary and crucial. To conclude, I would like to suggest some elements of reflections to stimulate and support WMA's action in countries. First, to develop contact in countries between medical associations and relevant NGOs. Second, to suggest policies within the scope of WMA mandate to give to the association the means to take action in areas where there is a gap. Third, to join the WMA. Any individual physician can join the WMA as an associate member, have access to meeting documents, and participate in WMA's debate. I hope that this short overview of WMA's way of actions to put an end to so-called conversion therapies will be useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. My details are available on WMA website. Thank you very much, and wishing you a successful meeting.
Finally, but certainly not least, I would like to introduce Victor Madrigal-Borloz, the UN independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, SOGI, whose forthright reporting to the UN Human Rights Council in July 2020 really put this issue firmly on the human rights agenda in a way that we had never seen before. I think we at the IRCT would like to take some credit for the progress that's been made, as Victor spent 6 years being the Secretary General of IRCT, where there was an awful lot of work done behind practices of sexual discrimination and documenting that practice, and was actually the motor behind getting this report that's been done by IRCT on conversion therapy implemented. Today, we will though hear how he will describe that the time is now and why the impetus and the movement behind this topic, the focus on this topic, gives us the space to actually make this global call. The forensic credibility of the assessment that is now on the table of the psychological and physical damage created by conversion therapy is undeniable. They're both documented in the IRCT research that's been done, but also in the forensic experts group, IFIC, who have made a statement, in which statement Victor has used and referred to many times, also in his report in July to the Human Rights Council. So at this time, we will be hearing Victor's reflections on what he's heard today from the different speakers, from the experience in Ecuador, from the experience in China, from the experience in Britain, what the World Medical Association is struggling with, and what IRCT is actually doing. We look forward very much to hearing your reflections, Victor, and we also hear and look forward very much to hearing what is the pathway forward for all of us working within the sector to ensure that individuals who are self-identify as LGBT experience their own rights and have expression, freedom of expression, and are able to live a life of prosperity. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here today in a space that has been called by an organization that is so deeply meaningful to me as is the IRCT, a network of health professionals dedicated not only to providing rehabilitation for torture victims, but very importantly, to putting the knowledge acquired in the process of rehabilitation to the service of prevention of torture. We have today the privilege of seeing gathered in this space activists, advocates, and persons with lived experiences from all latitudes, from Ecuador to Kenya, to the United Kingdom and China. We have heard today of the enormity of damage that is inflicted on persons because of so-called conversion therapies, the degrading point of departure that they take in their understanding that there is something disordered or antisocial in the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse persons, and the importance of ensuring that we create a world free of these practices for the future. We all know that practices of conversion therapy fall under a wide umbrella that is actually created to describe all of the interventions that are designed or have the flawed purpose of allegedly changing a person's sexual orientation. But we do have to interrogate the deeply powerful social and institutional drivers that actually feed these notions. Some of them are exercised in the name of religion. Some of them are exercised as remnants of the deep grooves carved by pathologization in the health sector. And some of them are remnants of the idea that LGBT lives are somehow antisocial or contrary to the common good of society. We also know that under the idea of change or conversion, there's also a wide set of criminal practices, including rape and beatings and other forms that are easily qualified as torture in the everyday lives of persons. Fighting conversion therapies is a complex and multidimensional task. It requires the involvement of the legal discipline in the definition of legal theories and terms that provide for an interpretation of these practices within the context of each legal environment. It requires the participation of practitioners in the health field, and it requires a deeper social understanding of the manner in which change will be promoted to ensure that these practices are not seen ever again as necessary. The complexity extends to the fact that, as we know now, perpetrators go from the widest angles of society to the most intimate, as some of these practices are indeed practiced or fostered in the family environment. My mandate has made a call for all of us to build a world free of conversion therapy. To end conversion therapy by 2030, we will all need to involve our efforts. I thank warmly the IRCT for its involvement in this task, and I am sure that together with the extraordinary human rights defenders that we've heard today, we will be able to create such a world. Good luck in your endeavors, and I look forward to continuing working alongside you.